Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Talk to me about Oregon, Dan.
Okay. Going out west?
I want to go out west because Oregon is kicking up big time dust, not just in the recruiting game with some of the guys that they've flipped, but also obviously the transfer portal has been very active in the transfer portal. Feels like Oregon has reeled in about 80% of the big names in the transfer portal so far. So where does this roster stand? What do they need? And have they addressed those needs via this recruiting cycle, either through the portal or through, freshman recruiting?
It seems they have. The clear focus is defensive line. They bring in 10 defensive linemen, I believe. Defensive line and to a lesser extent corner.
I'm sorry, 10?
10 defensive linemen. However, we're categorizing edge players, including edge-type players.
10. Good
10
Lord.
defensive linemen. They hit Texas for a couple of big names. They hit Arizona for a couple of big names, Southern California. 10 defensive linemen in this coming class. I think the headline name is Matayo Uiagalelei, DJU's little brother, a.k.a. Young Concrete. Which is
Young Concrete?
Young Concrete, a wonderful nickname.
Love
They
it.
beat out USC for his services, was a two-way
Young
player in
Concrete.
high school. Yeah. And so I think he's looked at as a sort of physical marvel who is still trying to hit his potential as an edge rusher. And there's not a ton of pressure on him because you mentioned the portal. Jordan Birch coming in from South Carolina, I think is expected to get a majority of those snaps at the edge position on the Oregon defense. But with the way Oregon was not able to get a pass rush this year, it was very clear that defensive line depth, getting push inside, getting to the quarterback from the outside, from the edge, was the huge priority. The other big name is Johnny Bowens from Texas, who came on late in the process. I think he was an Army All-American or an Under Armour, one of the All-Americans, and flashed in practice there. And so he's got decent size to come in as a rotation player. But yeah, Oregon and Tosh Lupoi and Dan Lanning are going to have their choice of guys. That defensive line roster is deep, and they also return like 3 or 4 or 5 guys who started a bunch this past year. So that's the clear priority. They flipped an LSU corner on the previous signing day, Dalen Austin. They added a blue chip corner in Roderick Pleasant, who owns the California 100-meter record.
Okay.
Not me anymore. It's not my number anymore.
Ousted you.
Ran a 10-1, Roderick Pleasant. So they beat USC out for his services. So look, the issues last year were tackling and in the pass game on defense. And so they're addressing it aggressively. And so even though they took some big swings and it didn't work out for some guys on both sides of the ball, those could be, Bowens and Matayo could be rotation guys depending on how quickly the fitness is there, the ability to read and develop moves against offensive linemen is there. On the offensive side of the ball, the big one is, I don't know if he's still a 5-star, at one point was a 5-star from Northern California, Jurrion Dickey. About 6'3", 210, 215. And so they lost Dante Thornton. They lost Chase Cota. They lost a couple of big names, but they hit receiver. They bring in Troy's best receiver as well through the portal. So that's a name who I think physically could be there pretty quickly from the same area where Troy Franklin's from, who's their clear number one receiver.
Number one guy, yeah.
Yeah, they're set at running back. The offensive line through the portal, I don't think there's going to be early impact guys. There's a JC guy. They hit Hawaii for an offensive lineman, but I really think it's going to be Dickey and maybe, they're thin at corner, they're thin at safety. If you remember, Peyton Bowen was a commitment for about 8.5 minutes on signing day. We'll talk about Oklahoma. So yeah, they address things on defense. Those are the two big names to me that Oregon, and we talked about this, you can look up the video as well, in terms of what Oregon needs to fix. They are aggressively going after those guys on defense and selling Dan Lanning and what he was able to do at Georgia in terms of development, in terms of system.
In terms of Dan Rubenstein's pet player, this incoming class, and I'll lump together, though, and this isn't a portal show, but for the purposes of this specific debate,
right,
I'll talk about both the incoming freshmen as well as the portal. Who are the guys that you are just fascinated with? Maybe not the guys that get on the field right away. Maybe they have to wait their turn a year or two. But the names that you've been reading, that you've been hearing a lot about as you troll your message boards and the seedy underbelly that is Duck Nation. Where are you at?
The Duck Web? Yeah.
Yeah. Where are you at with respect to just the guys that you are most fascinated in?
Dante Moore still hurts, Ty.
Yeah.
Dante Moore to UCLA late in the process before the previous signing day. Now he's going to be very good for the Bruins eventually. The big name to me is when you have the type of hybrid type players on either side of the ball, right? When you have the linebacker who can be excellent in coverage, when you can have the safety who can come up and hit. On offense, to me, it's Kenyon Sadiq. I believe that's how you pronounce his name correctly. He's a tight end from Idaho, was a riser in the process, and could be that kind of at his absolute peak, right? The modern comparison would be like Kyle Pitts, the type of tight end who can run like a receiver. And so that to me is fascinating. Oregon has had some of those guys in years past where they become a matchup problem, a matchup nightmare, folks. A matchup problem. To me, that's the one that's really interesting, that he might have the athleticism to be special for an Oregon offense, at least that we saw last year use a lot of 2 tight end sets. I think there's going to be a little bit fewer of those this year with Will Stein, but still, when you have somebody like that who could potentially be a problem to linebackers, safeties, whatever, hard not to get excited. So Kenyon Sadiq from Idaho is the one that I'm extremely hopeful for works out.